Yeah. Now I got that thing again that says stop recording. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Alrighty, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and May Day. Happy May Day to everyone. I was going to make some remarks, but it'll take too much time, so I'll leave it in the pinned comments section. But happy May Day and solidarity, and all my love to workers struggling every day and fighting always to make life better, not just for their fellow workers and communities, but for all of humanity. Working class hero is something to be. So keep up the good work and don't let the powers that be take the fight out of you. Anywho, my guest on this edition of One Plus One, we return to the topic of Venezuela, propaganda, insincere NGOs, and whatnots. And my guest is Joe Emesberger. Joe is an engineer by day and a union member for the Canadian Auto Workers as well as Unifor. He hails from Canada, and by night he is a media critic, NGO critic, socialist, and anti-imperialist activist and thinker. You can find his work primarily through the incredible media criticism organization Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, which is the U.S.'s leading progressive media critic watchdog, and it's nonpartisan. He also has been a contributor to Telesur English, and has a huge body of great articles at Z Communications, ZNet. And what better guests to have than to talk about all things Venezuela, the corporate and state media's role in demonizing the democratic socialist government, both of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, and acting as an extension of the capitalist imperialist powers that be in their ongoing efforts to oust Maduro and overturn the socialist project. And he recently has done a book with his co-author, the equally brilliant Justin Podur, have done a new book speaking out, debunking, and pushing back against the propaganda, primarily of the American corporate state press. And the book is called Extraordinary Threat: The U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. He is my guest on One Plus One. So, Joe, thank you for coming on, and not only on a Sunday, but on May Day.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate the invitation. So thanks very much.
It's it's a real honor to have you, and yeah, let's get straight to it. So, my first question to you, Joe, is, before we talk about corporate media and the and the imperialist scumbags, how they've been treating President Maduro. Can you, if it's can you, if it's possible, give a brief history of Venezuela, before Chavez got into power sometime in the 90s, the efforts to oust him and the role the corporate media played in that, and some of the and then after that, if it's talk about just some of the great accomplishments Chavez was able to give to the Venezuelan working poor, the dispossessed and marginalized folk.
Sure. Well, actually, chapter 4 of our book is called, it refers, I actually forgot the title, but it goes over the history. I think it goes to, actually I have the book, How Could Chavismo Flourish in Once Prosperous and Democratic Venezuela? And so what that chapter does is it goes a quick overview of the pre-Chavista history, because Chavez was first elected in 1998. He first, and we go over the history of what happened basically in the several decades before Chavez came to power. So, because especially since around 2014, there's been a real push to describe Venezuela as the once prosperous country that was then ruined by Chavismo when Chavismo first came into office in 1998. From 1999, he first took office. He was first elected in 98. There's been a real huge push to tell that really distorted history. And so we dedicated a chapter to going over to, and so the basic outline of the, I mean, any history of any country is complex. So, but we go over the very basic things. I mean, it is basically, Venezuela has been a major oil exporter since the 1920s. So it's not even like a country, like some countries discovered, like say Norway, Ecuador discovered oil in the 70s. right? Venezuela has been a major oil exporter, so one of the first, if not the first, major exporter since 1920s. And so from
Oh,
19 to
wow.
20, and it was only in the 1970s that some of the big exporters like Saudi Arabia and Iran actually surpassed Venezuela's output. Okay, so they've had several decades of being a major oil exporter. And so by 1999, when Chavez takes office, what's the situation? Well, despite those several decades of having this massive oil wealth at their disposal, they have a poverty rate of 50% in 1999. They have a child mortality rate that's double what exists in Cuba, which had been under decades of blockade already by that time. And so it was a country that was mired in just tremendous inequality and poverty, despite this massive oil wealth. And yet you never, you go over the kind of reporting, and we show this, the way the country was portrayed before it became an official U.S. adversary was very upbeat and positive. There was never articles that saying, my God, look how capitalism has squandered the oil wealth of Venezuela. But if they were honest, that's exactly what they'd say. So, my God, this has just been a disaster. And so Chavez, we note first came into prominence because what happened, it all kicked off really in 1989 when there was the infamous Caracazo massacre. And it's interesting to contrast that with the Tiananmen Square, because the Caracazo massacre, estimates vary, but it's anywhere from 500 to 3,000 people were murdered by the police, Venezuelan police in Caracas, throughout the country, but mainly Caracas, because the government of Carlos Andrés Perez brought in a really harsh neoliberal structural adjustment type program and drastically increased the cost of transportation. And there were massive riots broke out against that, and he put them down with the most extreme brutality. And we show that within 2 years of this happening, the New York Times wrote extremely upbeat news articles, not even opinion pieces, news articles, referring to him as a charismatic social democrat and just very upbeat about
Social
Venezuela.
Democrats, even.
Yeah, a very upbeat assessment of him. He was very tight with Bush. While the Caracazo massacre was going on, this is in the archives, in George Bush's archives. It is part of his historical archives where they have his transcripts of his phone calls. You can see that he made a phone call to Carlos Andrés Perez while the massacre was taking place to commiserate with him, the perpetrator, and to offer him loans and to basically. So it was just really eye-opening. So it was basically it's a very repressive, very unequal, very terrible society that is in existence. And in Chavez first comes into prominence in 1992 because he was part of a clandestine sector of the military that was, seriously, so disgusted with this that they were thinking, we gotta do something, we gotta take some action. And in 1992, he actually attempted a coup to overthrow the government at the time, and then it was put down very quick. He went to jail. And then several months later, there was another. While he was in jail, there was another coup attempt, and it was a little bloodier than his, but it failed also. But within 2 years,
I didn't know that. It's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of times, and we mention that because a lot of times people misreports, and we mentioned an example of this, that he led both coup attempts, and that's not true. He led one coup attempt.
Yeah.
There were minimal deaths because it fell apart right away, and he surrendered and went to jail. And then there was the second attempt while he was in jail was much bloodier. So sometimes people, maybe out of ignorance or maybe out of malevolence, they hold him responsible for both, right? But at any rate, the Caracazo massacre, killing 500 to 3,000 people, that's even at the low end of the estimate, that surpasses all the political violence that's been attributed to the government of under Chavismo over the past 20 years. Despite all the violent protests, coup attempts, everything that's going on, there's been nothing like that happened in the last 20 years. And yet, when that one coup attempt happened, when that massacre happened in '89, it was totally whitewashed and forgotten by the New York Times and all the major news outlets. So we go over that history to say, look, this is what a disaster the country was. Chavez comes in because eventually he was in jail. He comes out. He decides, okay, I'm not gonna I'm not going to try armed insurrection anymore. He wasn't the only one who had tried that. During the 70s, there were guerrilla movements in Venezuela. If you understand the history, how bad the country's been run, how corrupt, how unequal, how unfair, how brutal, then you realize why they had a problem with leftist insurgency as well during the 70s.
Sorry to interrupt because I'm just curious. Now, of course, we all know that Latin America has had, right-wing juntas after right-wing juntas, and was Venezuela the same, or was it always just two rival oligarchs, like a conservative party and a liberal party? But
no, we talk about that in chapter 4 as well. The system that governed Venezuela from 1958, there was a dictatorship that was overthrown by a mass uprising. A whole broad spectrum of society overthrew a dictator, but unfortunately it was replaced with what they called a Punto Fijo system. Punto Fijo translates directly from Spanish to mean fixed point, which is kind of fun. It's actually the place. It's actually the name of the estate where this deal was worked out between the major parties, basically to set up like a U.S. style, basically two factions of the same party running the country for swapping positions for a few decades, right? That's basically the system that governed it, and that's a system that ended up giving them the Caracazo massacre, because it was just an elite serving system. It wasn't perhaps as obvious a dictatorship as what came before, but it was hardly a system that responded to it had democratic forms, but didn't actually do the most important thing. The whole point, people often forget the whole point of elections and all that, is to have a government that actually responds to popular needs, right? If it doesn't do that, then it's just a facade, or maybe just a way to let people blow off steam, but it's not really doing what it's supposed to do. So Chavez takes office in '99, and it's interesting is that by he wins the election, that he implements a lot of very basic reforms, like he convenes a constituent assembly. They have elections for a constituent assembly to rewrite the Constitution. He has he convenes a constituent assembly to rewrite the Constitution, and then he with that new Constitution that's approved in a referendum, and then he has to run for re-election again. Because they have a new National Assembly. Everybody has to run for election again, including Chavez, and so everything's flowing along smoothly. But as he starts to push for changes and starts giving the message to the old traditional elite from the Punto Fijo system that you're not in charge anymore, right? And the U.S. Embassy isn't in charge. It was a big turning point was when he condemned the U.S. bombing of Afghanistan. That was a big point of rupture with him in the United States. He had a bit of a honeymoon period. With the U.S. He actually got along with Bill Clinton. But once it was clear he was not going to be like the guy who perpetrated the Caracazo massacre. Once it was clear he's not going to be like that, then they turned on him. And then there was the first major coup attempt against him was in 2002, where he was actually deposed for 2 days. So our book goes into we break down 6 major coup attempts, starting with the one in April 2002, and we describe each one of the book, and we look at the media coverage, how it was spun by the media in each case, right? But what's interesting is by 2002, the economy of Venezuela has not actually improved. The economy's gotten worse. Okay, but the people stuck with Chavez because they realized, they knew why it was getting worse. It was because he was being attacked. They were trying the traditional elite were trying to get rid of him, and they were trying, and even sabotage the oil industry in the late part of 2000. After the first coup attempt failed, the second major coup attempt was the sabotage of the oil industry, which provided at that time 80%, 85% of its hard currency that it needs for basic imports. Now it's much higher, even it's well over 95% or something. So in spite of that, the people stuck with him, and his popular support grew because the people recognized that he was really trying to fight to win some important battles before things could actually improve. And then when he did finally pretty much vanquish the coup attempts and had enough consolidated power enough so that he didn't have to worry about whether he was going to survive the next day or whatever. Then and coincidentally, oil prices since '99 really started to take off, but they didn't see any benefit from that until they defeated the coup attempts. Then they started to really see the benefits, and there was massive reduction in poverty, reduction in inequality, expansion of healthcare services, expansion of public housing services. The public housing services is something the public housing is something that even through the harshest times of the sanctions that came later under Maduro, they still kept plowing ahead with that. Now they just built like 4,000 public housing units. So 4,000 Venezuelan households, 4 million, did I say 4,000? 4 million housing units. And keep in mind, in Venezuela, you have like roughly 6-7 million families. So that's a massive achievement for affordable housing for a huge
for people living in barrios and what's is referred to in Brazil as favelas or ghettos, right?
Yeah. So that's a huge number when you consider roughly the size of how many families there are in Venezuela. That's a huge number. So so then they started to see improvements, and then when Chavez unfortunately passed away from cancer in 2013, and so we described the later coup attempts, which come with the passing of Chavez. That was one big blow. Then the massive decline in oil prices, which began really in late 2014, early 2015. Oil prices collapsed, and they stayed down for several years. And then on top of that, you had the U.S. reinvigorated with the decline in the economy. The U.S.-backed oppositions resorted to trying to drive Maduro out of office a few different ways. And then Obama started the sanctions, which are already damaging. He already started to put the screws to Venezuela's economy in 2015. And he called the country actually officially. In order to do that legally in the United States, he had to declare a national emergency based on the claim that Venezuela is an extraordinary threat to the national security of the United States. So that's where the title of the book comes from, because of course it's the other way around. It's the United States that's an extraordinary threat to Venezuela and to actually much of the world. You could say the whole world. And then we go over those coup attempts that come after that, and the impact of the sanctions, which Trump then escalated dramatically in 2017, until by 2019, with the recognition of Guaido, that along with that came a legal basis for an outright oil embargo, and then a trade embargo, and then secondary sanctions, which means you not only prohibit trade to the United States, but you prohibit trade from secondary people who trade with Venezuela, bypassing the states. They also get sanctioned. They sanctioned shipping companies. They actually seized shipments of gasoline from Iran going to
and
Venezuela.
The gold as well, right? That the crooked Bank of England has, right?
No, Britain seized the gold. The United States seized assets that were in the United States. Citgo, a oil gas company that's based in Houston, they seized it. Gave it to Guaido and his cronies, seized assets. So they seized assets, but they also, because of the sanctions, Venezuela's oil industry was so hard hit that they could not even, they couldn't refine their oil to produce gasoline. So actually, despite being an oil-rich country, had gasoline shortages, and so Iran, who's also under devastating sanctions, but much longer, they've had time to adapt to them, find ways around them, survive, because they've been under sanctions since '79, compared to Venezuela, really since 2015. So, and plus, for historic reasons, Iran was never quite as dependent on the U.S. as a customer as Iranians were. Iranians already had focused east, right? So, anyways, so they started supplying Venezuela with gasoline, right? And at one point under Bush, the United States actually, it was in 2020, I think it was June 2020, where they actually seized some gasoline shipments from Iran. The United States actually seized them. Of course, everything they've done since 2015 would be considered a major act of war if it was done to them. But for them, it's just natural that they get to do this to everybody else. So they actually seized the oil shipments. So it's been it's been just a constant escalation of their attacks, but Maduro survived them. And I think it's a dynamic similar to what I talked to you about with Chavez. Things got
Yeah.
worse under Chavez in the initial years, but enough people understood why. They understood why things were getting worse. They realized that there's a sector of the population that doesn't care about the rest of them and would gladly side with a foreign power to destroy them as long as it puts them in power. And so Maduro has managed to maneuver around all of that and retain not only retain office, but there's a credit swish who are hardly Chavistas. They're estimating a 20%, possible 20% growth in 2022 in this year. So it's remarkable that they've survived, and it owes a lot to their alliances with Iran, with China, with Russia, with Cuba, but also just internally how they've organized the educated and politically educated people to withstand this. It's really quite remarkable.
And it's funny because you already answered, what was the Venezuelan economic crisis, and stuff like that. And I think you already did a very good job of explaining that. But then, can you explain then to an audience that the efforts to overthrow both Chavez, but let's talk specifically about Maduro. How the efforts to oust both both of them is basically just a repeat of what the U.S. and its allies always do to any left-wing government, particularly in the region of Latin America, like Arbenz of Guatemala in the 50s, Salvador Allende of Chile in the 70s, Joao Goulart of Brazil in the 60s, Daniel Ortega, of Nicaragua in the 80s, Aristide both times in the 90s and 2000s, and of course Manuel, Zelaya of Honduras. Because I think what was really powerful about Alfred de Zayas when he was the special UN rapporteur and he spoke out on the sanctions and wrote in his reports, he emphasized that the efforts to the Western-backed right-wing opposition's efforts to oust Maduro is like what happened with Chile in the 70s, making the economy scream. So can you can you talk about that, and then I'll explain why why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, we talked about you can go back really far. Like if you take the example of Nicaragua, the United States, it was 1912 that the U.S. Marines actually landed in Nicaragua, actually occupied the country from like 1912 till like roughly, the dates are probably giving exact, probably till 1930, 35 or something. And then they left. And what happened was when they left, they didn't really leave because they had trained the Nicaraguan army to be their proxies, basically to continue the occupation after they left. And so that's basically the situation you have from the end of the occupation in the 1930s until the Sandinista revolution in 1979. So you basically have a U.S. direct U.S. occupation of the country for decades, followed by decades of like a proxy occupation by a U.S. trained military in the dictatorships of the Somoza family, especially.
Exactly.
And that doesn't end until 1979. So and then when the Sandinistas win the overthrow Somoza right away. Under Carter and then under Reagan, it escalates is a terrorist war to try to get rid of it, combined with devastating sanctions on Nicaragua, and which by 1992 actually succeed in convincing enough of the electorate that, or sorry, not 1992, 1990. They convinced enough of the electorate in Nicaragua to, well, maybe we better vote out the Sandinistas, because if we don't, it's obvious that we're just going to continue to get a terrorist war combined with sanctions, right? So that's, sometimes people say sanctions don't work in their direct objective. Well, that's an example where they did. They managed to get the Sandinistas out in an election that nobody should have recognized. I mean, I mean, the Sandinistas would have been well within their rights to say, screw you, we're not having an election. You guys are waging a terrorist war against us. You're strangling the economy. I mean, what kind of conditions are that? Like, but they had the election anyway.
Yeah.
They lost. And then it wasn't until, I believe, 2007 that Ortega gets elected again. I can't remember exact year he came back in office. I have the details a little foggy to me right now. But he comes back into office, and they're going at it again. They're trying to, in 2018 they tried to overthrow. But the key thing to recognize there is you have over a century of U.S. really savage interventionism in Nicaragua for most of basically over a century of it in a small country like Nicaragua, which does not have Venezuela's oil wealth. I mean, all countries have some naturals. There's something that somebody wants in any country. But Venezuela really stands out for its oil wealth and its mineral wealth as well. So, and with that comes the potential to not just offer like a positive example of socialism. There's a potential for that, which always frightened the United States. Always felt it had a crush, like in Cuba. But it also has the potential with its wealth to actually have, or at least regionally, provide alternative financing, which could help other countries liberate themselves from under the boot of the U.S. IMF and Interdevelopment Bank, all these institutions which are ultimately controlled by Washington, right? So
yeah.
And Chavez, while he was in office, while the times were good, he was able to help Argentina pay off the last of its IMF debt. He instituted a program called Petrocaribe, which helped small Caribbean countries get They didn't get cheap oil, but they got payment terms were very, very, they could pay them out over a long period of time at low interest, so that that would help them tremendously. So there was ways that he used. Built regional alliances, alternative. He was spearheaded ALBA, which is an economic bloc with other left-wing countries in the region. So there's a drive to integrate the region in a way that's independent of Washington, and that posed a major threat to them. But it's always been the United States' objective to basically run Latin America as its colony, as a neo-colony, if not directly.
It's backyards, the Monroe Doctrine.
Exactly. If not as a direct colony, like when it was occupied Nicaragua. It also occupied Haiti for almost the exact period of time, almost simultaneously, right? A very similar pattern. You occupy, you train an army, then you go away, but you leave your proxies in the military there to do your dirty work for you. And so the same pattern. So that's been the U.S. the way the U.S. has regarded Latin America for well over a century now, long before, because when I'm talking 1912, the United States is still not the most powerful country in the world. It's up there, but it's not. It's up after World War II that it really gets catapulted into the premier global power. So it's been doing that for well over a century. This is and then we talk about in the book, we talk about just the coups in this century alone, because sometimes people can dismiss that as ancient history, but no, it's just a continuation. And you look at the U.S.-backed coups, just we had Chavez, right? They tried to overthrow in 2002. We had Aristide in 2004. You had the overthrow of Zelaya in 2009 in Honduras. You had the overthrow in Bolivia of Evo Morales, another U.S.-backed coup in 2019, right? There's others that are less. The U.S. had a hand in Lula's eventual incarceration and the parliamentary coup that
exactly.
So everywhere you look where it's undermining democracy throughout the region in one country after another. And this is very recent. This is just in our own century, these examples I've given. So you can go. It's part of a historical pattern that goes way back, but it's also just examples all over the place, which we cite in the book just in the past 20 years alone. So it's a humongous problem. It's a humongous problem for all these countries. Is how do we have to mobilize not just to win elections against the local elite and their media that are stacked against us, but then we have to confront a major power that has still powerful enough to cause us serious problems and get us overthrown.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And that's a perfect segue to this question, which is, since we're talking about the corporate media. And I remember watching the gruesome defeat of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain. And when Corbyn had that stunning loss against Boris Johnson, I said to myself, wow, I completely underestimated the power of propaganda that comes from corporate and from corporate and state media. So when we talk about Venezuela, talk to us about how outlets like the Associated Press, Reuters, New York Times, Washington Post, how they've been, deceiving their readers on the U.S. war in Venezuela, and smearing, Maduro and the Socialist Project, and also the role of broadcast outlets like, take your pick, CNN, NBC, ABC, and PBS, if it's even possible.
Well, in our book, we focus a lot on the New York Times, on Reuters. We cite Reuters a lot. We cite the New York Times, the New Yorker. We cite various outlets that you can go through them and case by case and show how they distort things. Right? It has an impact because a lot of times the worst. And we have an entire chapter actually. I should mention on Rory Carroll, The Guardian. Because he was their primary.
Perfect. Perfect.
Right.
So you even go after the UK Guardian then.
Yeah. So we have entire chapters just dedicated to him because in this chapter we review his most of his, because he was in power from what do we say? Read Carroll and you've read them all. This is chapter 11. So he was in Venezuela from 2006 to 2012. So that's pretty significant because for two reasons. One is that this is from the supposed liberal, or what some people still, I think, very foolish to think is a left outlet. And
anything but. It's definitely liberal, neoliberal, but yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe now obvious to a lot more people, but back then not so much. And this is from 2006 to 2012 that he was reporting there, right? And these were basically the Chavismo's best years, right? And this is from an outlet that's left, considered on the left side of the corporate spectrum. So very significant to look at how the way public debate is constrained in our Western media is to look. Okay, well, let's look at we can pick out the most extreme right wing outlet. We look at Fox News, but it's sometimes more instructive to look. Okay, let's look at the most progressive end of the media, right? So that's why we did a chapter on him. So we reviewed his coverage during those years, and we reviewed his book, which he wrote shortly after he left Venezuela, called Comandante, which was a book that he wrote. It was widely praised all over it was praised by The Economist, by the Washington. He's got the reviews are just raving about it all over the spectrum. Everyone loved it. So and we go through the book, and the book is just monstrously dishonest, right? I mean, he treats the U.S. involvement in the coup that ousted Chavez as if it were some kind of conspiracy theory or some kind of nonsense that Chavez was throwing out there. And yeah, so there's all, like we say, in the same with the Washington Post, New York Times, it's like the evidence of U.S. involvement can never ever be fresh enough or strong enough for these guys to ever say, and with rare exceptions. I mean, there's one Washington Post editor who we quote who went on camera and said, he admits that yes, the United States was involved. They were supporting people involved with the coup while it was happening. They continued to support them afterwards. They accepted the opposition's version of events right after the coup. They recognized the opposition's government, and so yeah, they were involved in the coup. We cite the office of the State Department's Inspector General. Said that the United States was providing all kinds of institutional support, institutional building, funding to groups that were subsequently involved in the coup. They admit to all that, but then they still the report still concludes that, but it's really no big deal, But of course, just what they already conceded there, what I just told you, they conceded that they were funding and supporting all these groups involved in the coup and kept doing it after. That alone, I mean, to any reasonable person, that shows, this was a U.S.-backed coup. But to the Western media establishment, the evidence is never strong enough. It's never strong enough. It's never fresh enough. And Carroll's very much of that mentality in his book. And the other thing we showed about his book, there are many things, but one other thing we showed is just how he downplays the opposition's racism. I mean, there's only like two passing references to the book of the tremendous racism of the Venezuelan opposition. It's just really, visceral. It's really obvious. Anyone who follows their media and their opposition figures knows this. I mean, one example we cite is when in 2015 the opposition had won the National Assembly elections.
Yeah.
And so when Maduro gave a State of the Union address in front of their National Assembly, one of their opposition legislators was allowed to give a rebuttal. This was broadcast on national media, on like a cadena nacional, as they call it. It means that it's broadcast like a presidential speech on every single channel in the country. So the opposition figure was allowed to rebut Maduro in front of the whole country and every single network, right? And one of the things he talked about, and the country's already in this political crisis, economic crisis. And one of the things this opposition figure, his name's Henry Ramos, talked about was the fact that they took some portrait of Simon Bolivar out of the National Assembly because they didn't think they made him Bolivar look white enough. The the portraits of Bolivar, they were made from bone. They exhumed bones. And the features that in these portraits made him look a little like his nose, maybe not quite so thin. I mean, it wasn't like they made him like your typical African, but they made him slightly less European, and that enraged him. And he brought this up in the middle of a speech broadcast to the entire country. It wasn't like some marginal figure talking to some in a small outlet somewhere. This was a guy in the middle. It was so striking that he would choose to bring this up because it really pissed them off that much that these portraits didn't make Bolivar look white enough, in their opinion, right?
Wow.
And he brought this up, and the media just looked the other way. They didn't mention this, right? I mean, if Maduro had done that, this would have been it's done something that ridiculous. This would have been broadcast all over the world. He would have been ridiculed, called a racist, everything else. But this is the U.S.-backed politician, so there is nothing said about it. And there's all sorts of examples. There's various examples of the opposition's racism, and it always gets swept under the rug. That's one of the driving motivations in Venezuela, in Latin America. This elite is that they identify with the global north. They identify with the white powers that be, right? And
and of course, many of them are of European descent and whatnot, or yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, definitely that. But I think it's just even when they wouldn't necessarily, like Áñez, right, in Bolivia, Janine Áñez. There's no way if she went to the United States that people would look at her and think she classify her as white based on her looks. She looks very indigenous, actually, to most people, right? To most people. So it's not even a matter of what they look like, or it's a matter of who they identify with, And internally, the elite, regardless of what they look like, they identify with the white powers that be. I mean, it's not even a question of what they look like or what their actual descent, ethnicity, or whatever is. But so they buried the racism, and Carroll's very much part. So we go through Carroll's distortions of the economy. Carroll's basically his articles was relentlessly depicted Chavismo as repressive and irrational, and the United States as being picked on by or used as a scapegoat by Chavez. Just the standard trope that you find throughout the media. That's why he was lauded for his book Across the Spectrum. And so that's a very instructive way to look at how uniform the media is. So we spent a lot of time on him just for that reason. We feel that it was important to look at him for that reason.
As Danny Schechter once said, corporate media, the more you watch and read, the less you know, and that's a perfect that's a perfect segue to this. And I don't know if you addressed this in your book, but I've been wanting to ask somebody about about this for a long time. Can you talk about the role of the large Spanish-speaking corporate TV news and entertainment outlets, Univision and their English branch, Fusion, in influencing the Latinx community in the U.S., which is largely, working class and a struggling lower middle class folk, to support the Yankee Western imperial project in Venezuela, and also the role of well-funded, Venezuelan diaspora communities who are very similar to the far right, Cuban expats, anti-communist arrangement folk, who are very influential in convincing, Latinx and even Latino communities to support, this war for oil and mining in Venezuela.
Yeah, there's perhaps the best way, if you want to get, if anybody who's not like hasn't been following this closely, to me the best way to get quickly up to speed on what the not just Venezuelan but the whole Latin American media is like. And we talk about the Venezuelan media a lot because especially after the 2002 coup, they still are so disgraced because everyone their whole edifice of lies fell apart, because they were totally supportive of the coup, and then they were caught with their pants down after when Chavez was restored. So, what happened was during the 2002 coup, there were Irish filmmakers just happened to be in Venezuela, in Caracas, interviewing Chavez for a documentary. And while they're there, the coup happens. So totally by luck, they end up in the front seat view, documenting in real time the coup against Chavez in April of 2002. And with that, they document firsthand the incredible dishonesty and complicity of the Venezuelan media outlets in assisting the coup. And the documentary is called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised."
Great documentary,
and it's brilliant. And it's brilliant, and I encourage people to watch it. It's a quickest way to get up to speed on so many things at once. It gives you a sense of everything that's happened, and that's why the documentary was so despised and feared. Because, for example, we talk about the fact that the documentary was going to be shown at an Amnesty International Film Festival in Vancouver. This was shortly after the coup, and Amnesty International refused to allow it to be shown. And they went back and forth on different excuses for why it wasn't allowed. They said, one guy came out on Democracy Now! And said the documentary was too partisan. As if, how could you be one side perpetrated the coup, the other side was the victor. How can you have a non-partisan version of that?
Wow.
And then, but then the excuse that they settled on was that no, showing this documentary in Vancouver was going to put some of our staff in Venezuela at risk. So I mean, it was so preposterous. So it really, that excuse was bizarre because it actually was very. So you're saying that a documentary that makes the Venezuelan opposition look bad, you're saying the Venezuelan opposition is so dangerous that if you show a film that's critical of them in Vancouver, it's going to have repercussions all the way back in Venezuela on people who work for Amnesty. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? But I think they, in the end,
that's why they're a right-wing opposition, and that's why they're fascists. But okay.
Really, I think what in our opinion, what really happened was that they really didn't care if the excuse didn't make sense, because really the way they get spun in the media is that, well, all people are really going to see, especially from headlines, is that, well, Amnesty didn't want the film. The details wouldn't really matter. What was really going to, at the end of the day, the film didn't get shown, and Amnesty International, this big organization, said somehow this film is not something we want in our film festival. So that's all that came across. So it was a win for the opposition. Even if you look at the official excuse, actually would make the opposition look really like dangerous or something, right? Like wow, you can't even show a film thousands of miles away, and you're gonna. And actually, the guy who made the excuse for them, the Amnesty official who made the excuse that, oh, we're in danger if you show that film. I mean, he's calling for protests against Maduro. He's calling Maduro a mafia, and so he obviously has no fear of. Today he's constantly assailing the Venezuelan government, so he has no fear of assailing the Venezuelan government. So he was just, to put it vulgarly, I mean, he was just bullshitting. Okay, he was just throwing some stuff out there, and he knew that the film. But that just shows you the way they operate. They have very reactionary. Amnesty works with very reactionary people, and they just find excuses to toe the U.S. government line. In 2017, I wrote to them directly. And I was surprised they replied to me. Honestly, I just said, "Will you please denounce the sanctions against Venezuela that Trump imposed?" I mean, by that time in 2018, it was 2018 I wrote to them. And by that time, there was obvious that they were very devastating. Trump had even threatened a military invasion. I asked them also, could you please denounce his military threats? Could you please object to the fact that the U.S. officials are calling for a coup, and they wrote back to me. And I was surprised they did, and I was surprised by how blunt they were to say, "No, we don't think it's." I'm summarizing, but it's online, and I've referenced it, and you can see their full replies. And I'm not the historian. And what they basically said is, "No, we don't think it would be responsible or wise of us to address that. We don't think we think we want to focus on the Venezuelan government's responsibility to solve the economic problems. But you're gonna just tell me directly that you're not going to denounce the U.S. government's economic sabotage, which is by 2018. I mean, it's just undeniably savage, right? You're not going to denounce the military threats. You're not going to denounce that they're calling for a coup. Really, a human rights group is not going to say. It's just going to say no. We don't want to talk about that. I mean, it's just absolutely outrageous. And it just shows you that they're just not a credible group. I mean, these groups are they're basically frauds. And we have a whole chapter, not even about amnesty. I'm just talking about that's an amnesty example which we mentioned, but we have a whole chapter that talks about Human Rights Watch and just how horrible they are in Venezuela and around the world. We just go through example after example. So yeah, so the big NGOs are very much a part of the kind of they provide material for the Western media, and the Western media provides material for them, and just a whole they recycle and regurgitate each other's talking points, but it's all in service of U.S. imperialism.
But that's but that said, but that said, are you stunned that people talking about the Latino community that's based in not just the United States but also in Canada and elsewhere? Are you stunned that people who because I've met many middle class or affluent class Latinos in my life, and they know the history of U.S. exploitation and bullying of their region. Yet when it comes to Venezuela, right now with Nicaragua, as you mentioned again, and even with someone like AMLO, who's a very, very modest social democratic reformist, they all are ready to jump ready to jump the shark. Now, is that because they're probably watching outlets like Vision, as well as reading the junk findings of Amnesty International? But yeah. So I'm curious your response on that.
Well, I mean, for people in Latin America, it's the media, like everywhere. I think media works on different segments of the population. Everyone has different motivations for buying into the system. One aspect of it that we talk in our book is the so-called kind of professional class bias that Hugo Chavez encountered right away. Hugo Chavez gets first elected in '98. He has a lot of support among the so-called middle class. Is kind of a nebulous term. Sometimes I think the professional class is better. The doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, what have you, teachers. Well, some people have a little bit of capitalism gives them a little bit more prestige, a little more autonomy than, say, the workers, restaurant workers, taxi drivers, and so on, right?
Yeah.
Not that those other people can't have reactionary views too. I'm just saying that there is a certain more incentive for the professional class layer to buy in, right? Because the system gives them something, right? It gives them something that elevates them above others, right? And so it gives them more incentive to believe what the media is selling them, right? Because the media themselves, journalists, right, also of that same professional class. So when Chavez comes to power, one of the first things he tries to do is try to provide medical services to the people who have been ignored in the poorest neighborhoods, right? So he tries to go to the medical federations in Venezuela and tries to get them to buy in. Like, come on, let's get out there, let's get in, and they basically had a strike again. Even before the coup attempt, they went on a major strike against it. And the president of the medical federation is one of the signers of the infamous Carmona decree during the 2002 coup, when Pedro Carmona was in office. that abolished the Supreme Court, the National Assembly, or basically a major power before the 2 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so this guy who was Douglas Natero, who's head of the Medical Federation, he signed that decree, right? And he couldn't get any doctors to, he could barely get any doctors to sign up to his programs, because these organizations are powerful, and they can have influence. And also the mindset of the professional class coming out of these elite universities is not of a mentality, let's say, that's often going to be, not always, but it's going to tend to filter and push people into a certain mindset, right? A certain elitist mindset. And so Chavez comes to office, and so right away he starts bringing in Cuban doctors. So what's he bring? He's bringing in competitors, right? So now he's bringing in.
So Chavez. So the reason why Chavez was so friendly with Cuba and Cuban doctors, of course, it's because he admired their socialist policies. But the reasons why he invited those Cuban doctors in was because the Venezuelan hospital workers, which Chavez did make the healthcare system more of a single payer system, but those largely those private for-profit healthcare systems simply just did not want to help out the poor, even though Chavez gave them incentives. So that's why Chavez brought in those Cuban doctors.
Exactly. There was tremendous boycott resistance, right? From the So that's why he brought in the tens of thousands of Cuban medical workers, and he also brought in. It's important to note, the Venezuela Cubans are very proficient in intelligence services, and that's so he brought them in to help him manage his intelligence service as well and keep people honest, right? And that's also a source of tremendous resentment and flack, so among the opposite. So basically, you bring in competitors, right? So you have let's see, there's some ugly dynamics in every society. You start giving poor people access to education. I mean, whose toes are you stepping on? It's not just the elite; it's also the professional class. You're creating competition, right? And when you look at if you look at reporters, let's say foreign correspondents, they're not Murdochs, they're not Rupert Murdochs, even if they're working for them, but they have I'd say we say in their book that they have kind of a professional class bias and combined with an imperial bias that they bring to cover countries like Venezuela, and that explains a lot of their output. And just on a personal level, I have relatives in Ecuador that are of the middle class, right? And if you talk to them about Rafael Correa, a lot of them despise him, even though for 10 years Correa dramatically improved the country in many ways, right? Poverty, but when you're of the professional class, you have more incentive to believe what the media is telling you, because it feeds your own sense of superiority and privilege relative to everybody else. So I think that's when you look at any society, that's the propaganda is tailored to those sectors, right? It seems to work really best on those sectors, on those relatively privileged sectors. So I think that's part of the answer there to what you're describing.
Interesting, and of course, there's also the issue of of being a weaponized immigrant and wanting to assimilate and be part of the dominant American political culture. So so of course you're going to be you're going to be propped up if you if you have all those stupid anti-communist stuff, if you punch left,
well, yeah, you're talking about the expat community, and also sometimes the kinds of people who leave and actually get let in, right? A lot of times there's political bias in that, right? So, but a lot of times I think it's just down to class bias. Just the people who are in a position to be able to leave. Sometimes are just people who skew in a certain political direction, but it's not always the case, because mind you, if you look at Ecuadorian expats throughout Europe, you look at the voting and that it's very much in recent elections been in favor of a left-wing government under Correa. So it's because they were mainly refugees from the 1999 collapse of the neoliberal establishment. So it depends, right? It can vary, but often elects, if they're allowed into a country like the United States or Europe, they tend to have preferential, they tend to prefer people who are going to toe the line, and even if they don't, they'll tend to be ignored, right? Like anything, they'll go to the people, like you say, who toe the party line. They're the ones who get elevated and given a megaphone to express themselves. But I think in the case of Venezuela, I think it really is the Venezuelan expat community. If you just look at the voting records, because the expats do vote in presidential elections, and mind you, it's only legal immigrants who can vote, but still, it's pretty anti-Chavista for the most part. It's not like in Ecuador it's different, but it's with Venezuela. I think that you just really do have a larger segment of this professional class that tends to be anti-Chavista. I mean, it's not, obviously it's never 100%, right? It's never, but that tends to be the pattern.
And then I want to ask you, this question, which is which is about the issue of half truths. So in propaganda, sometimes a lot of us who push back against propaganda, we're able to convince someone, guys, this Iraq war is completely full of shit. Do not support it. Guys, Libya, this is another war for oil. But then you have the issue of Libya, although Iraq there is also this issue, and of course what we see right now with Ukraine and anything which covers Putin, there's the issues of what we call half truths in propaganda, and corporate media are very good sometimes at using half truths. So for example, was Saddam Hussein a brutal dictator? Well, yes, you can say that, but did he have weapons of mass destruction? Well, once upon a time, yes, given by the powers that be, but no, he did not have any weapons of mass destruction across the 90s and 2000s. But that was such a powerful half truth that it was difficult to say to people, guys, don't support this war. So when we talk about Venezuela, were there any half truths to some of the criticisms people made about Chavez or Maduro, or are you of the opinion that no, Hugo Chavez and if we talk specifically about Maduro, they're just the victims of full on propaganda? Yes, there's problems in the country. Yes, there's polarizations, but they're not really the fault of it. Capitalism, the powers to be, and all the efforts to try to oust them. I'm curious your response on that.
Well, and there's no such thing as a government that you can't criticize on some basis. I mean, like I say, there's corruption in every government. There's incompetence in every government. There's mistakes that are made in every government. We talk about one. We think it was a serious mistake that Maduro held on to an exchange rate system. That we think there were good arguments he could have changed that before the oil price collapse. It would have helped a lot. But it's very easy to criticize. But the criticism we think we have to focus on is in ourselves, because I mean the criticism that cries out to be made is, how is it possible that the United States is able to implement these murderous policies with such impunity? I mean, we always have to come back to, like, why are we allowed? Why are we so powerless here? Why haven't we got ourselves organized to put anybody in jail for this kind of thing? Why is Tony Blair still running around free and pontificating about politics? He's not even been expelled from the Labour Party. Why is that kind of stuff? Yeah. I mean, that's yes, you can criticize certain things that you could say there are various things that, like I just mentioned, you could criticize them on various fronts. For instance, police. There's a problem with violent crime, and we talk about in our book. There's a problem with the judiciary, corruption in judiciary. In fact, Chavez did not go far enough in contrast to, say, Korea, where they made more far-reaching changes to. That's why in Ecuador the violent crime, homicide just collapsed completely. It went way down under the 10 years of Korea. A lot of it had to do with the basic reforming of the police and the judiciary. Chavez actually did not go far enough in doing that. He was not bold enough in that, and so for a long time under even Chavez, despite the gains in in poverty reduction and all those other good things, they struggled with bringing down violent crime. Now, Maduro gets blasted for taking a different approach. It was much more heavy-handed, allowed the police much more free, and it seems to have had an effect of bringing down the violent crime, but also increasing the instances where the police basically perpetrated crimes themselves. So there's always issues.
Yeah,
always
and I would also add that, if I do have a criticism to make of both Chavez and Maduro, and even Lula, and I often ask this to people who follow Mexican politics, my criticism to any of those governments is, why are they still continuing the drug war, especially because that empowers Western imperialism to continue to colonize and divide and conquer them. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, you can always find things to criticize in any government, but the bottom line is, if you actually look at, we try to give examples of what's in the Venezuelan media, what they're actually saying. Well, just the fact that, like the example I gave you, that Henry Ramos in 2015 could rebut on every single television station in the country a speech to Maduro, right? Maduro gave. He was sitting right next to him. In fact, we have the picture in the book of Maduro sitting next to him, and he's standing up giving his rebuttal to Maduro, to the speech Maduro just made. I mean, a country like this could be described as a dictatorship. Is just absolutely outrageous. I mean, so again, any government in the world you can criticize, but I think the criticism, the most important that we as citizens of the global north have to make, is of ourselves, of our own political system, and how is it that our governments are able to inflict such harm on other countries all over the world and get away with it. So it's I think the criticism should come back at us.
And that's a perfect segue to this question, which is why has there been so little huge mobilization to efforts to stop the war, both the economic and military war on Venezuela, by the Western left, and not just Venezuela. I mean, we could be here for hours if we talk about Syria, Ukraine, the pivot to Asia with China and so forth. But specifically on Venezuela, why have so many left-leaning figures, organizations, even left-leaning outlets? You mentioned Democracy Now!, unions. Why can't they say clearly what those who mobilized in both Iraq wars would say, which is no war for oil? And even if one wouldn't vote for Chavez or Maduro, and one has a legitimate reason to criticize them or a bullshit reason to criticize them, why, unlike, say the Vietnam War and again, the Iraq War, so many, there just is not this, that level of mobilization to stop the war, to demand an end to the sanctions and whatnot. Yeah, your response to that.
Well, I think it's important to note that it's not easy when I think our part of it is, I think our efforts are divided. Some people think they can accomplish a little bit working within the Democratic Party, or the let's say the New Democratic Party in Canada, or the Labour Party in UK. There's a tendency to try to work within the system to bring about small changes that way, and so it divides people's resources and kind of muzzles people, right? I mean, so we aren't as bold as we need to be, just for that reason, because we're trapped into a system that forces us to muzzle our criticisms, or makes us think that it's the smart or appropriate thing to do is to muzzle ourselves. I don't think Corbyn gets criticized enough for how he squandered his 5 years of Labour leadership.
Yeah, right? Completely agree with you on that. Yeah.
So I think there's that issue, and also it's just there's been can't be blind to the fact that the repression of people in our societies is often much stronger than we like to recognize. I mean, we read the history of COINTELPRO, of Rita Sada Shakur's autobiography. She's now in Cuba, in exile in Cuba, a political refugee in Cuba. We were discussing before I came on about PayPal has basically canceled the account of Consortium News, an anti-imperialist, produces a lot of anti-imperialist content, and is actually perhaps possibly going to seize some of their money. So there's a lot of ways that the establishment has of either defunding you, smearing you, or even imprisoning you, as with Julian Assange. So there's also much more serious. Yeah, there's also much more serious repression than we tend to admit. You know, as me personally, a middle class white guy who isn't doing like, let's say, Julian Assange's investigating or unearthing secret documents and stuff. You know, I mean nobody. I mean he's peerless in that regard, and the impact and the provocative nature of his work. So, but that comes with a price, right? Or look at Steve Donziger. If you look up the case of Steve Donziger, just got out of prison. Well, months ago he was in prison, and he's finally got his ankle bracelet cut off, and that's because he won a case against Chevron in Ecuador. And his case is an absolute travesty. It's just an extreme example of judicial corruption and media corruption too, because there should have been no outcry in support of him years before it finally happened. Eventually, the case got so dystopian that he actually started to get some high-profile liberal support, but it should have happened years earlier. So he's a Harvard grad, a white guy, but even for people like that, if you touch a nerve and all the skin privilege you had before goes away, and they'll become the hammer will be brought down on you. So there's also just more serious repression, I think, that we tend to acknowledge.
And then just a quick follow up to that is, you mentioned Amnesty International. Oops, I mean Amnesty International, human rights fraud. Oops, I mean Human Rights Watch. And so can you, and this has always been one of my theories as to why so many left leaning folk are supporting Navalny, even though he's a rival far right figure, or when we talk about Venezuela and throwing Julian Assange under the bus. Talk about how Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and a lot of those NGOs. Do you think a lot of those NGOs, which have this good reputation, do you think that influences a lot of left-leaning folk when they're stupidly supporting non-existent moderate rebels in Syria, as well as the war for oil and mining in Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, these are the groups who don't have to worry about their PayPal getting cut off or getting thrown in jail, like Julian Assange. So they don't get the same level of repression. They don't have the same problem getting funders. They don't have the same problem getting attention. So yeah, they're gonna reach a wide audience. They're gonna mislead some people, right? But I think as more people catch on and start doing work, I think it's gonna be harder. But it's always an uphill battle, right? It's something we have to keep fighting. But yeah, that's why we focus a lot on them. We have a whole chapter on Human Rights Watch. They're part of the same disinformation loop. They feed into the media, and the media feeds into them. They cite them, right? So it goes both ways, right? Since I talked about Corbyn,
So you were mentioning, you're mentioning Shami Chakrabarti, one of Corbyn's shadow justice ministers.
Yeah, in one interview she gave on Sky News, she mentioned that her go-to sources for human rights are Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. So that's horrible. That's absolutely horrible that she would do that. So that shows that she's just completely out of touch. She doesn't. Yeah. So yeah. So
unbelievable. Well, we usually end the interviews now by doing this questionnaire that Marcel Proust, later Bernard Pivot, and my hero, the late James Lipton, would ask his guests on Inside the Actors Studio. So before I let you the rest of your May Day, Joe, let's do this quick questionnaire. Joe, what is your favorite word?
My favorite what?
Favorite word.
Favorite word? I don't think I have a favorite word.
Do you have a least favorite word then?
No, the words. No, the words. No, I don't think so. I don't think I have a least favorite word. I mean, not really. Not really. Nothing that comes to
All
mind.
right. All right. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Uh, I don't know. I think it's hard to say. I used to like novels a lot, but now sometimes just music. I think music is a good thing. Music is something
That's
that
perfect.
yeah.
Yeah. And then what turns you off then?
Well, I mean, the kind of things I'm dedicating my time writing against, researching, the whole it's imperialism. I think that's Western imperialism has been the terrorizing the world for centuries, and I think that's why I spent so much time on it. So
and and
that's the
and
thing.
and
That's
and
what I
and,
think.
and, and, and those on the left who engage in it, the propaganda of it all, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's there's been good work done by Gabriel Rockhill. If you watched his discussions with Justin Podur, my co-author on his podcast, and in other places, that's really that's targeted. That's conscious. I didn't realize the extent to which the CIA funds radical theorists, and so that's really surprising to me. If you would ask me beforehand, before looking into that, I would have said, well, the CIA probably doesn't care about radical theorists, these esoteric people that just talk to other leftists in very technical language that only few people understand anyway. I think CIA doesn't bother with them, but no, they do, because it's, when you see the so-called compatible left that the CIA talked about, that's by design. They put work into doing that. That doesn't just come out of nowhere. I think they put resources into making sure that develops.
Yeah, wow, and then that's definitely something that we definitely have to revisit in the future. And then, what is your favorite curse word?
My favorite curse word? No, it
And it could
depends
be
on
in
the
any
context.
language, by the way, because I know you're from a Latino background, so.
Yeah, well, it depends on the context. It depends how it's used. It's that's the word itself is. It depends how it's used. It can be used effectively. It can be used stupidly. It depends.
So like the F word then.
It can be used very effectively. Yeah. So it depends, right?
And then
Like
and
any
then
tool.
and then what sound or noise do you love?
Pardon me.
What sound or noise do you love?
What style of noise?
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, rain falling.
Funny. Lots of guests on the show really like the sound of rain, and then they need to go to Scotland and Belgium then. and then what sound or noise do you absolutely hate?
Oh, it's typical. You know, squeaky wheels and scraping of hands on chalkboard, that kind of stuff.
And then what profession, if you weren't doing engineering, media, and a lot of the activism you do, what profession other than yours would you love to attempt to do?
Oh, I don't know. That'd be cool if I could make money as a musician. That'd be nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
good choice. And then what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
Accounting.
Accounting.
Yeah.
Wow, you really are a left winger. And then, if heaven exists, Joe, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates, or whoever is the afterlife that you may or may not believe in?
Oh, I don't know. Just you did good.
Oh, you did good. Well, we were joined on this edition of, yeah, Joe, you did good, and you still are doing good. Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, a special May Day episode with Joe Emersberger, frequent contributor to Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, Z Communications, ZNet, Telesur English, Counterpunch, and Minpress News, the co-author with the equally brilliant historian and and journalist and media and NGO critic Justin Podur. Extraordinary Threats, the U.S. Empire, the media, and 20 years of coup attempts in Venezuela. People need to go buy it, along with Dan Kovalik's The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela, Alan McClough, formerly of the Glasgow Media Group and fair contributor, and of course, full-time on Minpress News. His book, Bad News from Venezuela, 20 Years of Fake News and Misreporting. All those will be money well spent. And Joe, it was great talking to you. It was an honor to finally speak to you. I hope we get the chance to talk again. Have a very happy May Day, and of course to the Venezuelan people, we say solidarity to them and the Bolivarian Republic, and we hope that they can continue to conserve the socialism they're trying to build. And when we talk about imperialism, all I can say is power to the people, and power to the people, and death to Western imperialism. So. So, Joe, thank you very much, and hope to talk to you soon, and keep up the great work you do.
Okay. Take care. See you later.